Welcome everyone to the Learning to Birth webinar series, where we interview some of the world's most interesting and inspiring thought leaders on birth and pregnancy. Today we have with us Jane Hardwicke Collings. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Akasha. So lovely to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Jane is an individual that I have a huge amount of respect for. I did your birth keeper training with you when I was pregnant with my second daughter 6 years ago. Everyone, Jane is a women's mysteries teacher, a founder of the Shamanic Womancraft school, and also the author of 10 Moons, The Inner Journey of Pregnancy, which is a wonderful book that we'll talk more about. Do you want to tell us like your background, Jane, and how you came to be this mistress of mysteries?
Woo! Mistress of mysteries. That's wonderful. Well, my background is as a midwife. I did my registered nurse training as a teenager, 19, 20, 21-year-old, and then I traveled for a year, and then I did my midwifery training in a hospital in Sydney, a big city hospital, when I was 25. And at 26, I left the hospital situation because I didn't feel like it was really helping women give birth that much. It was taking control of their births, but not really helping them very much. And I wanted to learn other ways than institutionalized intervention. So I became a home birth midwife, and I was a home birth midwife in both city and country areas for about 30 years. And I learned a lot in that area of birth, in the home birth. And basically what I did also was a lot of unlearning, because the way they train or teach midwives is basically on the kind of mechanics of birth, not a lot on the emotional or spiritual or shamanic dimensions, nothing on any of that. And they train midwives mostly to be handmaidens to the obstetricians and to carry on with the policies and procedures that have been designed for the system, not the individual. So I'm saying some harsh things about institutionalized birthing, but it is the reality. And I think for new mums and dads, it's one of the most important things to learn about in terms of birthing is that your choice of practitioner, like primary practitioner, and your choice of venue for the birth are the two most significant factors that will influence the outcome of your experience. So yeah, that's just a little on the side. But in terms of me, again, I am a grandmother. It's a lovely thing to be a grandmother. I have 2 grandsons and another little baby on the way. From my daughter, not from me, because I'm a postmenopausal woman now. I'm 61 and have been through the gigantic rite of passage of menopause. And as a midwife, I didn't think that there could be anything, possibly anything more transformational than giving birth until I went through menopause. So there's much more that awaits all you fertile women as you step into your wise woman years. And one of the things I'd say from this side to all of you mamas, that if you take care to actually pay attention to your birthing experiences and figure out what each one of them taught you about yourself, then it would be a very smart, and you will be so happy that you did, to take notes and make a list of what each birth taught you. Hopefully they build on each other. We'll probably talk more about that later. But these qualities that you learn about yourself through your birthing times, through your, say, mother or summer season of your life, are what you require, no surprise, to negotiate the next rite of passage of menopause. So be prepared and be writing them down now while you remember, because it's a bit hard to remember much at all when you're going through menopause. So while you can remember, to write down what you learned from your birthing experiences. So
I've got shivers. I'm tingling. Like my whole scalp is tingling because I'm just going, Oh my God. I'm just like, my whole face is tingling now. Like, I've never heard this before. And I'm like going, that is so probably, like, obviously it's true, but it's just like resonating with me. Like, oh my God, that is true. And I had no idea before.
Yeah.
Like,
It's so
amazing.
important, and it's really easy to do the process that I'm suggesting of figuring out what your births teach you about yourself. And this is also the case for women who don't have human babies, because when we go into the summer season of our lives, basically from about 25 years old through to menopause, we are creatrix. We are the creatrix. We conceive, gestate, and birth all manner of things, not just human babies. So that could be career, or a business, or a project, or a garden, or a new version of ourselves. All of these birthings need to be included in this process I'm suggesting, including every pregnancy, because every pregnancy results in a birth. So I mean, including abortions and miscarriages. Also, I'm not going to say miscarriage again, because I think we need to change that terminology, because that implies there's something wrong with the mother. That actually what we can refer to those experiences as is early pregnancy loss. So an early pregnancy loss and an abortion and any other pregnancy that doesn't make it all the way to term still counts, like hugely, obviously, but hugely in what the journey through the mother season of our lives is. In other words, use those experiences as well in this process of figuring out what they taught you about yourself. So yeah, so that, and back to how I got to be here talking to you. The other thing that I did, as well as being a home birth midwife, was to give workshops, because I was offering workshops to prepare for birth, like childbirth preparation workshops. And I was also doing lots of study and research and teaching at festivals and conferences and that. And also pulling together the connection between the whole rest of our lives and our experience of giving birth. Because, you know, contrary to what we might think based on the perception out there in the big wide world, birth is not some random event that you need to be scared of, or that will never repeat, or that needs to be managed and monitored by experts. Birth is actually, whatever our experience of birth is as if a culmination of our life thus far, and also as if a readout of our mindset, you know, like our beliefs, our attitudes, and our fears. So it's not a random event. So there are some things that we can really prepare for. So it's with that kind of perspective, which I will call the shamanic perspective. Shamanic meaning what lay beneath and around and above and all over the place. That is a setup for the next experience. So I was giving workshops, and then I started the School of Shamanic Midwifery, which is what it was called when it first started in 2009. And now it's called the School of Shamanic Womancraft, due to me being rather forcefully suggested to me that I change the name by the government, as they seemingly own the term midwife. So they didn't want me to be confusing anybody that I was training midwives. But I was using the term midwife for its ancient meaning, which means facilitator of transformation. It's not just birth, you know, like midwifery is about, as I said, facilitating transformation. And back not that long ago, midwives were not just about birth. A midwife was the community wise woman who helped everybody from womb to tomb. So anyway, so now we have the School of Shamanic Womancraft, which is a women's mystery school. And I love that term, and it makes everyone think, ooh, what's a women's mystery? But really, another term used to describe women's mysteries is blood mysteries, and another term is rites of passage. So basically, the School of Shamanic Womancraft is international now. I'm heading off to the UK in February to do my third European Four Seasons journey over there, and They're on offer in Australia, and also do the one-day workshops and other things like the one you went to back in the day too. So yeah, so I'm not catching babies anymore, but I'm working as a midwife of the soul. That might be a good way to say it, and helping women to make sense of why they do what they do the way they do it, and also to participate in as much as I can to help heal the wounded feminine and the wounded masculine of our patriarchal culture. So that's a long answer to what you asked me, but there you go.
There's so much if we had longer, I could unpack from all of that. There's like 1,000 different questions I could ask, but I'll try and keep it a bit on topic since we're talking about, pregnancy and birth. Do you want to tell us about some of the rites of passage that a woman will go through in her life, and then how they link together with pregnancy and birth?
Sure. Okay. So there are physical rites of passage, and that's what we call the women's mysteries or the blood mysteries, and there are cultural rites of passage. So a cultural rite of passage, which people have heard more about, would be things like graduation, wedding, divorce, new job, all those sorts of things. And then the physical rites of passage are our own birth, and then our menarche, which is our first menstrual period. So that's puberty for boys, and obviously puberty for girls as well, but also the beginning of our fertility and our menstrual cycle, our initiation into our menstruality. And then there's the initiation into our sexuality too, and that can take all kinds of shapes and versions, whether it's consensual or a violation, or hopefully not, but unfortunately that's the case for many people. And then pregnancy, as I said, every pregnancy results in a birth, and births are rites of passage, giving birth. And then menopause, which is the cessation of the menstrual cycle and the initiation into our wise woman years. And then death, the ultimate rite of passage. And many of the traditional spiritual philosophies say that everything is in preparation for the death. So I think there's a bit of a clue there to what we can use in meeting all our rites of passage, is the knowing that one leads to the next. So as I said, it's not just a random event, that it's the story of your life. And so the way a rite of passage works is that even if you forget to have a rite of passage, like whatever happens is the rite of passage, which is quite significant. So just think about puberty rites, and think about puberty rites for boys, for example, because that's kind of an easy way to see what I'm talking about here. So if a boy is not honored in his initiation to manhood at puberty, then he's not being welcomed and taught by the men about what it means to be a man. And so whatever happens around puberty ends up being his rite of passage. So however he is welcomed as a growing boy into a young man, often with shame and embarrassment and tomfoolery, and often the initiation into manhood is driving fast cars and getting drunk and having sex and all of that. So that ends up being the rite of passage. And so the thing about the rites of passage is that whatever happens or doesn't happen, whatever is said or not said, teaches whoever's going through the rite of passage on a subliminal level, which means they don't even realize they're being taught this. Another way to say this would be being brainwashed. So being brainwashed by what happens or doesn't into how the culture values the next role they're going into. So let's say at menarche for a girl, it's womanhood. At birth, it's motherhood. At menopause, it's wise woman years. So it teaches us how the culture values that role, and therefore how to behave to be accepted by that culture. So rites of passage create culture on the inside with the mindset, the fears and the beliefs that it makes, and also on the outside by everybody conforming to how the culture implies you need to behave to be accepted. Now, the how we're born, our own birth, is the setup for our entire lives. Well, actually, just going back a bit, actually the conception is like the Big Bang that created us. And if you can find out any information about how you were conceived, of course, to do that, you have to go through the process of really being okay with realizing that your parents actually had sex, which is, you know, often a tricky thing for younger people to even contemplate. But if you can find out the story of your conception, that's really the seed of influence. And then, of course, whatever your mother experienced during her pregnancy with you is huge, because the baby is, you know, again, contrary to popular opinion, the baby is a sentient being. And what that means is that babies hear everything, see everything, know everything on purpose. Like, it's part of the blueprint and the amazing design of us. Because the pregnancy, as the baby experiences everything the mother experiences, all her moods, all her fears, all her worries, it's preparation for the baby for what life is going to be earthside when it comes out and comes into the family or into life with the mother. So it's not a negative thing, and it's not something that women should be worried about or trying to protect their baby. Their baby knows and feels everything that they do. So to just see that as part of the process of preparation. So how we're born sets up our life. And the way that we most often, and I use this example in the pregnancy workshops that I give now, the connecting with the shamanic dimensions of pregnancy, the way we most often feel or experience our birth imprint is how we engage in creativity. So how we birth things, the creative act that we engage with, you know, like everybody's got a story about that. The same way that everybody's got a story about whether they can sing or not, you know, like, so, oh, I'm not creative, or I can't ever start anything, or I don't, you know, blah, blah, blah. I bet you that it is connected to how everybody's been born. I mean, I know it is. So that's a big piece. And then the next rite of passage is our menarche, our first period. And this is a huge one, because this is the actual really significant enculturation of being female. So at menarche, a girl is initiated into womanhood. And just like babies are hardwired to expect that when they're born, their mothers are going to look after them, at menarche, we are hardwired to expect that a group of women will welcome us to womanhood, will teach us all about the menstrual cycle and how to flow with it and how to look after our bodies through it and what all the signs mean and all of that, because we know that our menstrual cycle is, to quote Alexandra Pope, the barometer of our well-being. Or another way to say it is the menstrual cycle is like the canary in the coal mine, meaning that everything that requires attention or is out of balance in our lives will show up in the menstrual cycle. So our menarche, when we begin our menstrual cycle, is like the significant moment where we learn how our culture values woman and therefore how to behave to be accepted by the culture. Now, I've been part of a big research project called the Waratah Project through the Victorian Women's Trust. And a book has just been published all about the findings of it. I'll just reach for it. And it's called, perfect name, About Bloody Time, the Menstrual Revolution We Have to Have. And basically it's the results of the research that was collected from conversations and questionnaires with about 3,500 women, both in Australia and around the world. And the information is, I mean, women like me who work as menstrual educators and helping women reclaim feminine knowledge, power and wisdom and strength, we know this is the case, but it's shocking to see it in stark numbers, that the amount of menstrual shame that is begun and then reinforced afterwards at menarche is so sad, so sad. So menstrual shame is not just some minor thing. Menstrual shame leads to body shame. Body shame leads to low self-esteem. Low self-esteem leads to all manner of negative behaviors, including eating disorders, self-harm, and this is the, well, I find this particularly sad, dangerous sexual decision-making. So menstrual shame, I believe, sits really at the root of most of the problems that we're all going through in our modern culture. And it's really easy to fix, you know, like we just need to co-create a positive menstrual culture. And lots of people are participating in that now. And it has to be something that we all do. So to the mamas out there listening to this, make sure that when your daughters and your sons, of course, but particularly your daughters around, when they come to puberty and menarche, it is your absolute responsibility to make sure that they are initiated into womanhood in an empowering way, and that they learn all about their anatomy and their body and how it works, and how to look after themselves through the menstrual cycle. Because she who was initiated into womanhood at menarche is the woman that shows up to give birth with years of experience of practicing through her menstrual cycle, or not, how to listen to her body. So I really believe that our menstrual cycle is like primo preparation for giving birth. If we flow with our cycle, so just to be clear, that the menstrual cycle is not just about the bleeding time. That's just a short part of it. You know, it's like 3 to 5 or however many days up to, 29, 30, 31, however long your cycle is. So there's a lot more to the menstrual cycle than the bleeding part. However, the bleeding part, the time when we menstruate, is like the perfect opportunity to practice how our body speaks to us and calls us inward, because that's the preparation that I believe that women are best served by or with when they come to birthing. Because if you practice going inside your womb, like I mean metaphorically, and I mean shamanically, and I mean in a meditation sort of a way, if you go into your womb during your bleeding time, your womb, which actually has neurons or brain cells in it, as does your gut, as does your heart, your womb can speak to you about what you need to do to best flow with your situation and your life and anything that's driving you nuts, basically, which will play out in your menstrual cycle. So that, I see, is preparation for birth. So if women have been avoiding their menstrual cycle, particularly just carrying on regardless, maybe even taking Panadol or whatever the drug of the day is to be able to ignore it, then, is it any wonder that when we get to labor, the first thing we're thinking about or being told about are ways with drugs to stop the pain, So the menstrual cycle is the way into understanding our body and our body's processes that I believe is great preparation for birth. And we know from the work of Sharon Maloney, who's done a PhD on this subject, that our menarche impacts our birthing experiences in all kinds of ways, but especially through any menstrual shame that you carry forward. Because going into birth being unsure about the power of your body, let alone the sacredness of it, is like, a bit of a setup to handing over your power to somebody who calls themselves an expert, and, you think that they know more about your body than you do, et cetera, et cetera. So how we experience our menarche is a setup for our menstrual experience, which is a setup for our birthing experience, which is a setup for our mothering. What I was talking before about making sure everybody remembers the qualities they learn about themselves from birthing. The other piece to that is that whatever you learn about yourself in birthing a particular person, that's the quality you need to bring to mothering them. So that's a big piece. Whatever
the
you
quality
learn.
that you need for yourself, or the quality that you need to imbue into them? Like, what do you mean?
What you need to call on in your own self. So, for example, in my first birth, I learned about surrender. And now I learned about surrender because I didn't do it. And I didn't even know that I didn't even know how to do it. So the first birth taught me about surrender.
Yeah.
So I need to bring the quality of me in surrender to the mothering of that child.
Wow.
That child who's now 34, because if I don't surrender in my mothering to him, which basically means me getting out of the way and letting him have his life, really, and helping him rather than controlling him. If I don't do that, it's a pretty ugly scenario with a 61 and a 34-year-old. We get back to what his birth was, which was me trying to push him out for 4 hours and his head banging against my cervix and me not being able to budge his head. I later realized the head I couldn't budge was my own because I was trying to control the situation, but I didn't realize any of this during the time. But just to say, so what I learned was surrender, so I need to bring surrender in my mothering of him.
That's phenomenal. That is like a key that unlocks so many things. And if only I had have known that, 12 years ago, I think my mothering would have been a lot easier.
Yeah, and also, like, every child is going to be different. And every child is different. Every birth is different. And you will learn something different about yourself each time. So it's not like you just learn one thing. However, however, humans don't seem to learn from their experiences. It's kind of a thing. But if we don't learn, we continue to have the same experiences until we do.
My two births were very, very different because I certainly did take on board what I learned from my first birth. And then that, was what I used to power, like, to transform me. And that's how I ended up places like with you. What was I was at least 7 or 8 months pregnant during your birth keeper weekend with you. That was I just loved that. I still reflect on that. It's just a beautiful, beautiful couple of days in the hills there outside.
Precious time.
Yeah. I guess based on what you've said about body shame, menstruation, the menarche, I'd be really surprised if I had 100 women in this room. If there was one of them, I'd be like maybe the one or two who had a positive image of themselves, because at least of my generation, because it was just something that happened and you hid it. And as you've said, I never did the Panadol, but it was common among young girls that I knew, the Panadol and everything, because it aches, it hurts. But how do you then, as you're a birthing woman, maybe you're pregnant now or you're planning to be pregnant, how do you then roll back that body shame and reclaim that the sensuality of the menstruation so that you can actually use it to prepare for birth?
Yeah. Well, just while I think of it, the first period that you have after your baby's born, however long away that is, you can do a reclaiming ceremony there where you pretend, like you imagine it's your first blood again. And you have some sort of a ceremony, whether it's by yourself or perhaps with your girlfriends or whatever, where you honor yourself instead of repeating here comes my blood again, blah, blah, blah. So So we have the opportunity to heal our rites of passage all the time. And that's like a classic example of it when you get your blood back after your baby. But in terms of how to prepare for birth, if that's been your story, well, you need to do your inner work. So the inner work what's the inner work? Okay, so the inner work is one of the simplest ways to do this is to write down all your fears. And don't buy into this crap that if you talk about your fears, they're going to happen. That's like, that's not a thing. If you don't talk about your fears, then,
Yeah. If you're afraid of your fears, then they happen. If you talk about them and release them, then it's okay.
Yeah, it's a different thing. Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is one of the processes that we do in the shamanic dimensions of pregnancy. So write down all your fears, and you know, it can be a totally private process. Nobody needs to see them, so you don't need to engage in any worry about being found out that you're fearful of whatever. Everybody has fears, and the thing about fears is often they're cultural, you know, so it's just in the air, so to speak, or, you know, like birth is pretty feared in our culture, so there's lots of cultural fears around birth. Then there's family fears, or familial, or mother line, or red thread. So each of us is the representative of our red thread, or our mother line. So every woman who's giving birth is the latest version of her generations ago people doing the same thing they've all done. And it all gets passed down. So often it will be like the same. Often it will be the modern day version of it, or often it will be healed. And that's obviously the desire. So, and other fears we have, we taught them by our families, because our parents or whoever are the major caregivers, and they teach us to fear things to protect us. And then the other way we have fears is we learn fears from our experiences. So in terms of birth, if a woman has a traumatic experience giving birth, then I'm sure she gathers some fears around birth from that. So write down all your fears, and then it's a process to follow that, where because you have to have a fear, to fear something, you have to believe something that makes it a fear. So step one, acknowledge your fear. Step two, figure out, what do you have to believe to enable that fear? You know, so if you fear, let's just think of a common fear. If you fear that your labor will get stuck, or it won't progress, or you won't be able to handle the pain or the physical sensation or something like that, then what's the belief that you have to have that fear? And so you've got to think that through. It might be similar for people, but it might be particular for individuals. But something like the fear of that would be something like, my body, you know, I can't handle pain, or my body fails me, or my body, I already know from my experience so far, my body doesn't work as well as other bodies, or, you know, whatever. Or something a bit bigger than personal, that birth is a dangerous event, etc. So you figure out the belief, and then you ask yourself a question: do I actually believe that? So if you don't believe it, like if you don't believe that birth is the most dangerous experience you can ever encounter in your life, and therefore you need to fear it, then all you need to do is say, okay, if I don't believe the belief I have to believe to even enable the fear to happen, then I can eradicate the fear. If you do believe the belief, then you have to ask yourself, firstly, do I want to believe this? Do I actually want to believe that? And if you say no, then you have to update your belief system, and you update it to, birth is what my body is built for, or whatever. And then the fear goes. Or if you do believe the belief, and you do want to continue to believe that belief, then you need to watch out, because that's part of your warning system. And I'll just give you an example about, you know, to help that one make a bit of sense. Like if you fear having an episiotomy, and a cut to the perineum to make the baby come out faster, if you fear that, and the belief that enables you to fear that is that the hospital you're going to has a 80% episiotomy rate, and you know that to be true, then your fear is warranted and is alerting you to danger. So, you know, fears alert us to danger, but we need to figure out whether we actually even believe the belief that enables the fear. So that's step one in the inner work. And
I'll just say, I think, Jane, that what you've just distilled for us is probably the most useful thing I've been taught in my whole life, because it's you know, updating the software in our heads. A lot of the time, these fears and beliefs, rather, these beliefs have come to us and we weren't even conscious. Like they've just, the subliminal, they've just been installed, as you've said, through culture, you know, and we aren't even aware they're there. They're just running as programs in the background, you know, and then we have to update that software, you know, and, you know, I'm sure that you're going to tell us how to do it. I know that how I've done it in the past, but you've got to actually know what the programs, that software is running first before you can do it. And the way you've just said it is perfect.
Yeah. So it's really as simple as that. And it requires one to be mindful, really, you know, like if you start playing an old app, so to speak, that's out of date, then you just have to say, oh no, I meant to get rid of that one. I'm updating my operating system here, so those apps don't work anymore. Like using the computer metaphor is actually really useful, because in pregnancy, it's a totally different operating system because of how the hormones affect our brain and therefore everything about us. Yeah. So, and that's on purpose. And like, for example, you know, that concept of, what do we call it? Baby brain. You know, like we put it down and we make excuses for ourselves and all that kind of stuff. So firstly, on that, anything to do with the feminine that is put down, made fun of, or a taboo or seen as negative is a clue that it holds power. So this whole baby brain thing, the same thing happens at the other rites of passage, at adolescence, in pregnancy, and at menopause. It's like, going back to the metaphor of the computer, it's a defrag. So what happens? Yeah, we just drop away the stuff that we don't need to remember. It's all still there, we can access it, but we don't need to have all the lyrics of every song at the front of our screen, for example.
I love it. I've been going through a fair bit of baby brain myself lately, and I haven't had a baby for quite a few years. I'm going, what is going on? But yeah, you're right. I think my brain is just defragging.
Yeah, because there's a lot of unnecessary stuff that we, you know, are carting around. And the other thing that happens during pregnancy and breastfeeding is that the mothers shift into a different kind of nervous system dominance. So our dominant nervous system in a non-pregnant, non-breastfeeding situation is the sympathetic nervous system, which is on and up and fight and flight and, you know, blah, blah, running around the place. Whereas during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and we go into a dominant parasympathetic nervous system. And that is what the baby is in. So the other cool thing that happens there is that the mother and the baby kind of attune when she's during pregnancy, and that's, all of these things happen on purpose. So I think one of the things that we humans do is that we find fault in the feminine experience, but if we look at it as exactly what needs to happen on purpose, then we can actually see what bloody miracles we are, you know, like the classic one that I always refer to is part of the spiel around why babies need vitamin K injections at birth, because all babies are born with low vitamin K levels. So maybe that's on purpose. Like if all babies have a similar situation, it's not because that's a problem, you know, like all you need to do is go looking deeper into that. And it is about clotting, and it is about the cord and blood flow and all of that kind of stuff. So everything that is happening to everyone is because of a reason. So yeah, so back to where do we get on? Baby brain. What was I talking about?
It was the second half of the inner work. So identifying the beliefs and then
updating acknowledge your fears, update your beliefs, and figure out what all the stories are that you're bringing to this birth. So when I say stories, I mean actual stories too. So the stories that you've been told from being a little girl all the way to now, the stories you've been told about birth, And, you know, unfortunately, mostly it's pretty bad. Same as menstruation, you know, like, and I would imagine everybody who's been pregnant has realized that they become a magnet to everybody's negative birth stories, which is actually just another example of how sad it is that mothers don't have the formal opportunity of debriefing their births, which is so important and so important for the inner work. So that's another piece to it for everybody, that they need to really debrief all their previous birth experiences, including themselves being born. So what are the stories that you bring to birth? What you've been told. Another one is, how do the women in your family give birth? And so you want to know about all your siblings, if you have them, how they were born. There's an interesting thing that sometimes happens where when you give birth to the baby number that you were, it's a fractal, it's like a connection, and you can do some special healing and even understand your mother's experience of birthing you, which is cool. So how your family gives birth, and this is a clue into your red thread or your mother line story. In other words, what's the generational trauma that you're carrying? So we carry generational trauma from our own bloodline, but also from all women. And, you know, like, I think it's Eckhart Tolle. Many people have read some of his awesome books. He refers to pain bodies, and that's an energetic thing, an energetic pain body. So we carry the energetic pain body of not only our family line, but all women. And a lot of people think that that has a lot to do with menstrual pathology of now, and even the whole premenstrual experience, like PMS, is part of tapping into the female pain body. So what are the stories? Yeah. What are the stories you've been told? How do the women in your family give birth? And also the whole situation about, what was your menarche like? What happened at your menarche? What was your experience of menstruation? And working back, you know, what was your birth? Because how you were born becomes your birth imprint. It doesn't mean that you'll give birth only how you were born, but it means that's how your body knows birth happens. So that is an invitation, say, for people who were born with intervention to actually do the work to think about why that happened and why that does happen these days, and what you need to do to be prepared for that. And for those who are having second and subsequent babies, especially if they had intervention in their previous ones, one of the biggest things they can do to prepare for the one coming is to look at the story of the previous labor and birth, and look at when the intervention happened, and think about now, what would have helped? What could have happened? What could have been? What could I have done? What could someone have said to me, etc., if that happened? And then set that up with your support person or your partner or whoever the right person is, your practitioner, so that when you get back to that point, because you will, that you have the secret potion, if you like, or the magic spell that will help you realize, oh, I'm here at that place where blah, blah, blah happened, when all I actually needed to know was blah, blah, blah. So that inner work, the inner work of connecting our previous rites of passage, because our rites of passage are times of great transformation. We change from being one version of ourselves to the next, and we never return to that previous way or being. Like, think about menstruation. You know, you change from being a little girl or a big girl into a young woman, and you never return back to that. So same with birth. So our rites of passage tell the story of our life journey. All you need to do to figure out what your big lessons are in your life are to decipher your rites of passage and what you needed to learn from them. And not only does that give us our opportunity to see what might happen next and also what happened before, but it also helps us to realize the point of our journey, the teachings, the lessons, and therefore our life purpose. Because our life purpose is to help others who have experienced anything similar to what we have, when we are what's called the wounded healer. The Chiron actually is the archetypal astrological information about that. But so the inner work to prepare for a birth is to look, it's that classic, what is that thing? If you want to know where you're headed, look where you've come from. So the past leads to the future, which we unfortunately are seeing very loud and clear in our world right now. And it's the same within our lives. Whatever happened before will be part of what happens next. So the inner work for birth is what's required to catch up, so to speak, as we were talking about, for perhaps an unconscious menstrual cycle, but also just for everybody anyway. It behooves us to do this work. And it's not complicated. You don't have to go hunting very far, because whatever arises for you when you're pregnant, and it'll be showing up either in your relationships, in your health, in your body, in your work, or whatever arises is like the tip of the iceberg that will show underneath the need that hasn't been met, that ends up creating the behavior or the thoughts that we have or see in the here and now. So all a mother needs to do to prepare for birth is to deal with all the things that are arising and calling for attention. And as I always say, we grow more than the baby when we're pregnant. We grow ourselves into being the mother the babies come for. And we can't get it wrong. We are the chosen one. So, so totally take the pressure off everybody to know that you will have the birth you need to have to teach you what you need to learn to take you to the next place on your journey. So there's no mistakes, there's no good birth, there's no bad birth, there's no failure. The birth you have is the story of your life. And that's actually the invitation. And also, it's creating you to be the mother that the babies come for.
So beautiful, Jane. These words are exactly what I need to hear, exactly what a lot of people probably need to hear. Do you want to tell us about your courses and how people can come and work with you?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I offer one-day workshops regularly through the year in Melbourne, Sydney, and up north, usually in the Byron Bay area. And so I do a workshop on the cycles. It's called Moon Song, and that's where everybody remembers everything, the things they forgot to teach us at school about the cycles, which are running our lives. And then I do the Connecting with the Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy workshop, which is much of what we've just been talking about. And then another one-day workshop called Autumn Woman Harvest Queen, which is about menopause. So I think that's probably, I don't know whether it beats birth or ties with birth as the most feared thing that happens in our lives, but menopause. And then there's year-long programs with the School of Shamanic Womancraft that I offer, and there are 13 teachers of this program now. The school's having its 10th anniversary this year, so
wow.
it's a thing. So
I know a lot of graduates of the school who've only ever had beautiful things to say, and then it guides their whole lives afterwards and how they perceive the world and themselves. So it really does produce a revelation and a revolution in your students.
Yeah, that's so good, isn't it? And basically what the mission of now is, because we're living in a time of an unprecedented time, a time where we don't know what's going to happen and a lot of unpredictability. So what needs to happen now, and we all need to do this together, is whatever we need to do to be the women the earth needs now. So we are created and recreated every rite of passage. So what we need to do is to really take charge of our rites of passage, particularly birth, so that we can have an empowering experience. Even if it's an elective cesarean, even if it's an ocean birth with dolphins or an orgasmic birth, whichever birth it is, and every birth is just exactly what it needs to be. It needs to be empowering, because what we need now, we need the women the earth needs now, which are strong, resilient, and adaptable. Many other things as well, but we need to be raising children in that way as well. So our rites of passage are where we are formed or not into these characteristics that are required for now. So as well as running the School of Shamanic Womancraft, I also run with lots of help. I have lots of help to do this. As much as it takes a village to raise a child and a community to hold the mother, it takes a community and more to enact and carry out a revolution. So what's going on now is a revolution, a paradigm shift, and we all need to be part of that. So I have a grassroots revolution group called the Agents of the Goddess. I can give you some information about this you can share with everybody.
Yes, let's definitely put those links with this.
Yeah.
That would be beautiful, Jane. Yeah.
And my other work that I think is really important is at Menarch. So helping mothers to welcome their daughters into womanhood in an empowering way. Because, you know, I really believe, and I know it's true, I've seen it, girls who are initiated into womanhood in an empowered way and who are taught how to flow with the cycle and how to look after themselves, when it comes to them giving birth, they're not going to roll over when some expert says, listen, honey, I know your body better than you. I'm an expert. She'll say, excuse me? How could you possibly know my body better than I? I've been menstruating for the last however many years. I know when my womb speaks to me and how and what I need to do. Thank you very much. I'll call you if I need you. So
that was me in my second pregnancy. That was me. I was like, I'll tell you if something is wrong. Otherwise, don't bother me.
Yeah, that's what we need. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to, as my teacher, Janine Pavati Baker, said, we need to dismantle the cult of the expert and create the culture of self-responsibility. So workshops are on my website, website for School of Shamanic Womancraft, and I've got lots of lovely books. Here's my 10 Moons book, the
beautiful book.
The Inner Journey of Pregnancy, Preparation for Natural Birth. And here's one of my latest ones, which I love, Mother Nature's Wisdom. So it's an interactive book to read to your children, all about the cycles. And then my Becoming a Woman book for girls approaching menstruation. And my Her Story, which I'll give you the link so everybody can get the free download of this. This is how we got into this situation. And then I've got menstrual cycle stuff. And I've got a couple of new books coming out soon, so long as I sit still long enough.
Always so beautiful. Like, particularly, I mean, obviously the words inside them, but the design as well. It's just, it feels like, you know, you can just touch them, like just the way that the colors are on them. It's like they're a tactile thing. They've got spirit, you know, they're not just a produce of mass, you know, mass culture. It's like they've got a sense of feeling to them.
Thank you.
Where do people who are listening here today, where do they follow you online, Jane, or how can they connect with you?
Okay, so I've got Instagram and Facebook, just my name, Jane Hardwicke Collings. And I'm running a social media campaign at the moment called Waking the Witches. And it's lots of different truth alerts, unfortunate pieces of information with their references that show how we've been put to sleep, basically, because we need to wake up the witches. And remember, don't have a conniption when you hear the word witch. It's another example of a put down of a powerful word that actually means wise woman. And then I have a website, janehardwickecollings.com, and a big blog on there. And for those mamas there who are pregnant, there's lots on there about placentas and what you need to do about them. So make sure you read that. And also the School of Shamanic Womancraft.com and moonsong.com.au is all about the workshop. So lots of different places to find me.
Yeah, and definitely follow Jane around the world and do her workshops, or call her over to wherever you live in the world and get Jane over there to do a workshop, because they're really, really special, and I loved it.
Thank you, Akasha.
Yeah, thank you for being with us today, Jane, and explaining so much. You know, I mean, I love sitting with you and just listening for hours. And I feel like that's something I could have continued to do today until 10 or 11 at night. But it's just been wonderful, just so much, even in this last hour. I guess before we go, I'll just ask you a really general question. And I guess that would be for you, like what gift do you think, because we haven't really touched too much on this, but and you and I might have an understanding of shamanic that maybe the average listener wouldn't, but maybe you can expand on that as part of the answer. But what wisdom would a general shamanic awareness, if you know everyone in the world was to actually have that again, like what shift would that bring in the world?
Well, it would help us to really notice. I mean, it's hard not to once you start noticing it, the interconnectedness of everything. So that's basically what the shamanic worldview is, that everything is connected, like duh. But we've just been talking about how our rites of passage are connected, but we are connected to each other, to the planet, to the trees, to the animals. And in that interrelatedness, there's lots of information for us. And we can use that as a conversation. So when we think about the shamanic dimensions of something, think about the conversation that is happening with everything around you that can give you information about what you're pondering, for example. And you could also replace shamanic with the word inner. So everything that's going on inside you is a shamanic dimension, or what lay beneath, or what is the precursor or prequel to whatever's going to happen next. And also the main thing is about the connection to nature. So the thing about nature is we've got this idea that we visit it. The thing is, we are nature. So we are part of nature. We're the human variety of nature. And when we realize that, there's a whole lot of rules and premises and fundamental situational beliefs and perspectives that happen throughout everything. And obviously one of those is the cycles. But in terms of pregnancy, what nature can teach us is that birth happens one way or other according to the environment in which you are and what you have been using to nourish yourself. So same rules apply to humans as it does to everything else on the planet. So a shamanic perspective would bring that into account, and it helps unravel and it helps us make sense of things. And also to see where we're not wanting to look or tread, that whole fear.
It does bring light. It brings light so that when you're in confusion and you don't know the answers, if you listen to how the world actually speaks, you'll find what you need to know all around you.
Exactly. Like even from the clouds, even from the ants, even from the wind. The weather is a great storyteller. And within the School of Shamanic Womancraft 4 Seasons Journey, the year-long program, one of the main things that happens is a wilderness solo or a vision camp, vision quest. And this is exactly what we're talking about. What happens is the women go out on their own and water fast, if that suits their metabolism, and sit with nature for 3 days and 3 nights so that they can reconnect to that wavelength, maybe is a way to say it, or
frequency,
definitely. Yeah, so that we can see that we are part of the whole, and then everything starts to make so much more sense. So I think if we can just remember that the shamanic perspective is the interconnectedness of everything, and that one thing is telling the story of everything.
Yep. All right. Well, we've covered the story of pregnancy, the story of the inner work, that we need to do to birth our babies and birth ourselves as mothers and birth ourselves in preparation for the next stages of our life and even afterlife. And it's been beautiful speaking with you today, Jane. I hope that everyone listening has gotten some beautiful gems and rubies and flowers and feathers out of what we've been saying. And I hope that the wind enjoyed it, and the flowers and the birds enjoyed it too, because everyone was listening. So thank you very much, Jane. And thank you everyone who is listening. And you can follow Learning to Birth at Learn to Birth, Instagram, Facebook, and we'll see you next time. So bye-bye.
Bye.